This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalia with tonight's top stories. A powerful 7.5 magnitude quake strikes off Japan, triggering tsunamis in its northeast coast. Now, authorities are urging immediate evacuations and suspending bullet train services. South Korea's President Lee is seeking stronger ties with India, aiming to double trade by 2030 in critical minerals, nuclear power, clean energy, and other sectors amid global supply chain uncertainty. Also, China urges the U.S. to abide by the ceasefire deal with Iran after American forces struck and seized an Iranian cargo ship near the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran now refusing to join new peace talks. Beijing, the largest importer of oil through the blockaded waterway, is forced to look elsewhere for energy. China now importing more fossil fuels from countries such as Russia and Mongolia. Plus, Japan takes on its biggest ever role in the Balikatan war games, sending combat troops to the Philippines for the first time in decades, a major sign of Tokyo's growing security role in the Indo-Pacific. Also tonight, victims of Hong Kong's deadliest fire in decades begin supervised visits to their homes today to retrieve personal belongings that may have survived the blaze. A strong 7.5 magnitude earthquake has struck northern Japan. It occurred about 2 hours ago at a depth of about 10 kilometers in Pacific waters off northern Iwate Prefecture. So far, tsunami waves of up to 80 centimeters have been reported in Iwate Prefecture. But warnings remain for waves as high as 3 meters in Iwate and parts of Hokkaido. The tremor was strong enough to be felt as far as Tokyo, a few hundred kilometers away. And for the very latest details, we're joined now by CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. Mitch, what is the latest on the quake as well as the tsunami?
Yes, Oteli. Well, tsunamis have been observed in northeastern Japan, namely Hokkaido, Aomori, Iwate, where the strong warning has been issued on tsunamis, and also Sendai Port in Miyagi and Fukushima, which are under a mild warning. Now, there are reports of blackouts. Tohoku bullet trains suspended its operation. As to nuclear plants in Tohoku, Higashidori, Onagawa, have reported no abnormality, and also Fukushima Daiichi and Daini have reported no abnormality. So far, no major damage has been reported from the area. But the quake was indeed strong, measuring a magnitude 7.5. The strongest jolt was an upper 5 on the seismic intensity scale of 7 in Aomori. And it was so strong, it could be felt all the way down in Tokyo, which is about 600 to 700 kilometers away. Tsunamis of up to 3 meters can be recorded according to the Japan Meteorological Agency. So far, the highest reported is 80 centimeters in Iwate. Now, evacuation is ordered to 150,000 along the Pacific coast from Tohoku to Hokkaido. Remember, in 2011 March, the area was devastated by a magnitude 9 earthquake. Over 20,000 died or are still missing, and 470,000 were evacuated. Even today, there are thousands who have not returned. It's mainly due to the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. Now, as tsunami waves approach the archipelago, that they can increase in size as they did back in 2011.
So, Michio, from the authorities, what have you heard from them? What are they saying?
Well, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told reporters those in areas where warnings are issued should evacuate to higher ground. And here's more from her.
政府としては地震発生後直ちに官邸危機管理センターに官邸連絡室を設置し、私からの指示を踏まえて被害状況の把握、救命救助等の災害応急対策、また国民の皆様に対する適時的確な情報提供などの対応に全力で当たっております。
The Japan Met Agency gave a news conference at 6 p.m. Japan local time. It reiterated those receiving tsunami warnings staying near the coast or near rivers to flee to higher ground. Back in March 2011, tsunamis were climbing up rivers. Now, waves are apt to hit the coast one after another. Later waves could be bigger. An agency warned that in the next 2 to 3 days, as strong or even stronger quakes could be triggered, as was the case in the past. Now, the epicenter this time was close to the epicenter of many strong quakes observed in the past, and the Met Agency referred to as far back as 1896 and most recently in 2015 when 3 big tremors were detected within a few days.
I appreciate those updates there. CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida speaking to us live from Tokyo. India and South Korea pledging to work together to ensure a stable supply of energy resources and key raw materials. President Lee Jae Myung just held talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi as tensions in the Middle East continue to disrupt global energy supplies. Now, Mr. Lee is on a 3-day visit to India, the first by a South Korean leader in 8 years. For more insights, we are joined now by CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk live from Seoul. And we also have Ishan Gak covering the story for CNA in New Delhi. Well, I'm going to start with you first, Ishan. What other developments came out of today's talks?
Well, we've seen 4 memorandums of understanding, main pacts being signed between India and South Korea, and they are quite wide-ranging. One is a memorandum of understanding on cooperation in the fields of sports and cultural and creative industry, another on the establishment of industrial cooperation committee in the fields of small and medium enterprises, a third one to help bridge the digital divide between India and South Korea. But of course, the biggest one could be a memorandum being signed to upgrade the two countries' economic partnership to the next level, which is boosting the trade pact that the two countries have with each other. India and South Korea say that they want to boost their bilateral trade from the current levels of $25 billion a year to $50 billion a year by 2030. And that is going to be a mammoth task because analysts have been saying that while these two countries have had friendly ties with their economic interests ranging from electronics to automobiles, it's a relationship that has so far, according to them, punched below its weight. So we have now seen both leaders adding huge importance to economic ties between the two countries. Apart from that, we also saw commitments being made from the leaders, President Lee and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, saying that they want to improve this relationship and saying that this is something that they are going to work towards in building a relationship that works for the future of Asia.
So, Yun-suk, we hear here the significance for India, but is it the same for South Korea? I mean, why is the visit happening now and what they're hoping to achieve?
Well, as you said, this is the first South Korean state visit to India in 8 years, and that alone is significant. And also in this joint statement, President Lee Jae Myung described this visit as right now as a time of global uncertainty and said that South Korea and India can become optimal partners for mutual growth and innovation. So, this visit alone is not just, ceremonial, but many experts here saying that, in a way, it responds to the much more unstable global environment now, especially when it comes to energy and supply chains. We have President Lee Jae Myung directly referencing the Middle East situation and the need to ensure stable supplies of energy and key raw materials. Now, for South Korea, it relies very heavily on imports, and it's hoping that India can be a useful partner in diversifying that risk. And then there's also this economic angle. Now, India is now the world's 4th largest economy, and both sides have now set this clear target of doubling the bilateral trade to $50 billion by 2030, with expanded cooperation in areas like shipbuilding, AI, and defense. So overall, many experts here are saying that this trip is about reducing the external risks, securing supply chains, and expanding this economic opportunities in a much more uncertain global environment.
So, Ishan, let's talk about India here with the conflict in the Middle East. How is it creating economic uncertainty, and what does the country risk? And I guess the question is, how can closer ties with South Korea actually help cushion the impact?
Well, this is a moment where India is essentially faced with two critical questions. One is, of course, its energy and supply chain exposure to the Middle East. That is being challenged by the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, for the past year and a half, India is also dealing with the question of economic uncertainty that comes with tying its trade ties to the United States of America, which under President Donald Trump has been troublesome for India because of the tariff situation. So India forging closer ties with South Korea is not only about Beijing, about New Delhi and Seoul coming together to boost their economic partnership, to take their trade to a new level. It's also about India trying to forge regional alliances, trying to frame its foreign policy to look more towards the eastern side of the world than towards the western side of the world. We've heard from analysts who are saying that India is increasingly looking towards like-minded countries with which it shares similar principles of governance of trade, with which it can potentially work towards building economic relationships which are not fractured by international events.
And Yoon Suk, I believe both sides, they mentioned about cooperation on working on peace in the Korean Peninsula. I'm just curious to know how significant a role can India play here?
Well, in that joint statement speech, President Lee Jae Myung thanked India for its consistent support on Korean Peninsula peace and called for a continued constructive role. Now, India is one of the countries that maintains diplomatic ties with North Korea while also having close relations with South Korea and the United States. And in fact, India last year appointed a new ambassador to Pyongyang after a 4-year gap. And, analysts are saying that alone signals signals that New Delhi is actively keeping that channel open with Pyongyang. And also because India is not being seen as, part of any bloc, it has this degree of independence in multilateral sittings and quieter diplomatic channels that few others have. And so India, is definitely not going to be a frontline negotiator on this denuclearization issue because that will be led by the United States and other key players. But many analysts say that India can play a supporting role in helping sustain this dialogue, reinforcing stability and engaging perhaps new forums without taking sides. And many analysts here also saying that India's role as a leader of the global South is, why it should engage more actively. And so, this visit is being seen, at least in part, as an effort to try and get India to play a more active role going forward.
Many thanks for helping unpack India-South Korean relations. CNA correspondent Lim Yoon-suk live from Seoul, and Ishan Gag covering the story for CNA in New Delhi. We are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, as the Iran crisis rattles markets, oil prices are splitting in two, and the gap is widening fast. We'll delve into the real price of oil. Plus, Taiwan may soon allow companies to pay dividends in US dollars, a shift from the long-standing local currency rule. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for business news with Roland Lim. So Roland, we're talking about US-Iran tensions, no surprise there. But tell us how that's all adding to market jitters just at the start of this new trading week.
Yeah, oil prices did jump, but Asian equity markets breezed higher. Many analysts say robust AI-driven guidance supports further upside for East Asian tech stocks. Taiwan markets touching a record high. Equity markets in the region shaking off the latest escalation of tensions in the Middle East, with the investors seeing any extreme scenario of prolonged conflict unlikely. Japan's Nikkei 225 share average rose, nearing an all-time high it scaled last week on optimism over artificial intelligence. The benchmark Nikkei rose 0.6%. The broader topics index ended up the day 0.43%. South Korean shares also closed higher, led by a record-setting rally in chipmaker SK hynix ahead of its earnings release. The benchmark Kospi closed up 0.44% after rising by as much as 1.4% earlier in the session. SK hynix gaining 3.4% to post a record close. Samsung SDI rose nearly 5% after the battery maker signed its first deal with Mercedes-Benz to supply batteries for electric vehicles. And Taiwan's tech-heavy index also ending up 0.4% after gaining nearly 1.5%, hitting a fresh record high of 37,344 points. Well, currency markets are steadier, but traders are watching Kevin Walsh's Senate Banking Committee hearing tomorrow for clues on the Fed's next chapter. Mr. Walsh is U.S. President Trump's pick to lead the Federal Reserve. The US dollar index is hovering around 98, supported by fresh safe haven asset demand. Against the yen, the greenback is nearer to 159, keeping markets wary of possible intervention if it pushes towards 160 to the dollar. ADB chief Masato Kanda over the weekend warned that any delayed response from the Bank of Japan to the war on Iran could put pressure on the Japanese yen. And against the yen, the dollar is near 6.8, with China's currency staying firmly after Beijing kept its loan prime rates unchanged. Now, Taiwan is reportedly considering a rule change that could allow listed companies to pay dividend in US dollars instead of the local currency. Bloomberg says regulators are still working through the operational details with no clear timeline of any rollout. The proponents say the move would remove an extra conversion step for firms holding large amounts of US dollars with many overseas investors. At present, companies are required to convert those funds into Taiwan dollars for dividend payouts, only for foreign shareholders to switch back to the greenback. Now, the change could also help reduce seasonal volatility in the Taiwan dollar during peak dividend season. Foreign investors held about 45% of listed Taiwanese stocks last year, while firms have announced some 2.2 trillion Taiwan dollars. That's about 70 billion US dollars in dividends for 2025. Now, China has kept its benchmark lending rates unchanged for an 11th straight month as policymakers weigh the economic fallout from the Middle East war. The one-year loan prime rate, that's a benchmark for new loans, that was kept at 3%, while the 5-year LPR, a reference for mortgage rates, was unchanged at 3.5%. A solid early year growth and rising inflation reduced the need for further monetary easing. First quarter growth hit 5% year on year, at the top of the full year 4.5% to 5% target range. Analysts say this reflects resilience supported by ample oil reserves and a diversified energy mix, setting it apart from much of Asia. Factory gate prices rose in March for the first time in over 3 years. That's an early sign that the Iran war is pushing cost pressures into the world's second largest economy. Markets across Greater China rose, with investors also responding to fresh market-friendly policies. The securities regulator broadened eligible strategic investors for share sales, revamped fund management incentives, and cracked down on illegal sales by major shareholders. As mentioned earlier, crude prices rising again as the US and Iran teeter on the brink of a renewed war after attacks on commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Brent crude futures currently advancing 4.29%, that's $94.26 a barrel. US market of West Texas Intermediate, $89.30, that's up 6.5%. But both contracts did tumble by some 9% on Friday after Iran said that passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz was open for the remainder of the ceasefire. Now, more than 20 ships passed through these straits on Saturday carrying oil, liquefied petrol gas, metals, and fertilizers. That's according to Kepler data. Now, that was the highest number of vessels crossing the waterway since March the 1st.
Now, if you've been watching oil markets, you might be wondering if the Middle East disruption is causing real pain in the physical market. Why then aren't oil prices looking much worse? Well, I've got Roland here. He's seated right next to me. He's going to explain to us why that. So walk us through it, Roland.
Yeah, so essentially there are two different oil prices. The first that we always talk about is the financial markets. That's the futures contracts. That's what traders call the paper barrels. That's what we usually report on. Brent crude is the world benchmark. And US Texas Intermediate is the US marker for oil prices. And those prices have come down considerably since the start of the Iran war, sitting close to the highs of $90, as I mentioned, or $80. And financial traders would seem then to be pricing in some sort of optimism over the opening of the Strait of Hormuz again. And then you have the second price, which is the physical price. So that's where you have actual barrels. They are loaded onto tankers, and then they are brought to refineries. And those two prices are very, very different.
Okay, I need you to elaborate a bit more. How different exactly are they?
Dramatically. Okay, so refiners pay what they call landing prices. Landing prices includes things like transport. Now, it used to be before the crisis, it cost $1 a barrel to send oil somewhere around the world. Today, it's $25, okay? Insurance has exploded. I mean, we're talking exponentially, okay? So all that adds up. So I'll give you an example. Europe buying oil from the Middle East, okay? Today, they're paying a premium of $28 over the benchmark. So that puts price for Europe at about $120 to $145 a barrel, okay? Here in Asia, we're getting it worse because the oil has to travel longer and further away. So we are paying north of $175 a barrel for oil that we want today. You compare that with a refinery in Utah, the US. Now, that refinery would have access to direct pipes. They're just paying $77 for a barrel of crude. So we're talking about a differential of almost $100 between Asia and the US. And it's all to do with geography, and it's all to do with logistics.
And that's quite a fair amount. I mean, we've got the financial market. They're telling us, hey, you know, things are going to calm down. Don't panic now. But the physical market, I mean, the pain there is very real.
Yes, you are right. It is very real. And to be fair, though, the financial markets didn't get it wrong, but they are measuring something else altogether. They are measuring a collective market that traders think that's what's going to be happening in terms of the expectations and as well as the probability. And they're all betting that this disruption will not last for a very long time. So that's why crude prices are very different from the actual physical market. But then again, I mean, you have state-owned refineries like in India and Korea. They don't trade or run on probability. So they're going to need the oil today, the barrels today. They need it. Otherwise, there's going to be energy shortage. There's going to be power cuts. And the economy is going to be drastically affected. So they're going to pay any price. And that's why there is that huge premium in the physical market.
So for now, you would say the US is insulated from all of this?
Well, for now, yes, but for not much longer, because tankers are already on their way to the US Gulf Coast, simply because European and Asian buyers are now turning to the US as the, I should say, barrel of last resort. I mean, the US, because of their shaling activity, that's made them like the biggest oil producer in the world, but that doesn't necessarily make them immune. Because I'll give you one example. The oil shock has taken off the table some 10 million barrels a day from the Middle East. That's not something that you can replace overnight or even gradually try to replace. So the Americans will feel it at the pump at some point because there's going to be more demand for their oil. Pump prices already, I should give you some sort of perspective. In the US, it's gone up 90 cents a barrel. 90 cents per gallon, I should say, sorry. We're talking about barrels. 90 cents a barrel, a gallon. So that's about $4 a gallon in the US, and that's up some 3.5 years in historic highs.
Well, I'm already paying more at the petrol pump, and there's always a fear that what goes up is not going to come down. Anyway, it's always good having you speaking to us and unpacking this all for us. Thank you so much, Roland. Well, time now for another break. But coming up on East Asia tonight, plenty more. Why protesters are calling on the Philippine government to stop the biggest ever annual military drills with the US. And North Korea says it tested cluster munitions over the weekend in a missile launch supervised by Kim Jong-un himself. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Japan issues orders for coastal evacuations following a strong 7.5 magnitude earthquake off the northern coast. Tsunami warnings remain in place for waves up to 3 meters high. South Korea and India agree to strengthen ties to ensure the stable supply of energy and raw materials as President Lee Jae Myung looks abroad to mitigate the impact of the Middle East conflict. Plus, the ceasefire between Washington and Tehran at risk after the US seized an Iranian cargo ship that tried to run its blockade. Iran hitting back, vowing to retaliate and shun new peace talks. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for the maintaining of normal passage through the Strait of Hormuz in what's seen as rare direct comments on the war on Iran. Well, this comes as Beijing expressed concern over Washington's interception of an Iranian-flagged cargo ship near the waterway.
和平窗口既已打开，就应该为尽早结束战争创造有利条件。中方支持相关方继续保持停火和谈判势头，将本着习近平主席4点主张精神，继续推动局势缓和，为最终实现中东地区持久和平稳定发挥建设性作用。
China's foreign ministry spokesperson added that all sides should avoid further escalation and create the necessary conditions for normal transit through the Strait to resume. Well, this follows Iran's pledge to retaliate after a U.S. destroyed, fired on and seized an Iranian-flagged vessel in the Gulf of Oman. The ship had been traveling from China. Iran's military calls the move armed piracy. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump said they seized the cargo ship after it tried to get through the U.S. blockade. Reports quote Iran as accusing Washington of breaching the ceasefire by opening fire at the vessel. The peace deal is set to expire in 2 days. Iran's foreign ministry says Tehran has no plans for more talks with the U.S., citing what it called Washington's excessive demands and continuing naval blockade. Just yesterday, Mr. Trump confirmed U.S. negotiators will head to Pakistan to continue negotiations with Iran. Now, traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains at a standstill after Iran reasserted control over the vital waterway. Tracking data show traffic still disrupted, although at least 3 tankers have passed through. Well, that disruption has China, the world's largest importer of oil through Hormuz, looking elsewhere to power its industries. According to the latest customs data, China's crude oil imports from its biggest supplier, Russia, went up 14% on year to more than 10 million tons. The biggest surge came from its BRICS partner, Brazil, up 154% to 5 million tons. While Beijing is making up for the shortfall from countries like Saudi Arabia, down 31% in March, and from Malaysia, down 41%. Customs did not record any imports from Iran, though oil from Malaysia is reported to be sanctioned Iranian imports that are rebranded. China's electricity grid is powered almost entirely by coal and renewable energy. Coal imports up marginally in March. The biggest surge coming from Mongolia, up 64% on year to 11.1 million tons, as imports decreased from China's largest supplier, Indonesia, as well as Russia. China's foray into green industries helping it to weather a shortage in fossil fuels. Almost all the extra power the economy requires each year is met with new solar or wind. Its electric vehicle boom also means the country is importing much less oil. And to conserve energy supplies, China has banned fuel exports. By some estimates, China has enough oil in storage to replace imports via the Strait of Hormuz for perhaps 7 months. And I've got more insights on the war in Iran on our website, cna.asia, or on our mobile app, including this commentary on the reality of a lack of a deal, with both sides far apart in their demands, despite logic and market demands for an end to the conflict. Now, the US and the Philippines are conducting their largest military exercise, the Balikatan drills, from today until the 8th of May. The exercise coincides with the 75th anniversary of a defense treaty between the allies and features expanded participation from more countries. Now, partner nations Australia, Canada, France, Japan and New Zealand will be joining in with representatives from an additional 17 countries present as part of an international observer program. Now, more than 17,000 military personnel will be involved in the exercises held across the Philippines and showcasing a full spectrum of operations. Participating forces will deploy a mix of air, land and maritime assets. Now, Japan, joining the drills for the first time as an active participant, will be deploying its largest warship, the helicopter-class destroyer, JS Issei, the US-2 amphibious search and rescue aircraft, as well as 1,400 troops. Now, Tokyo will also deploy its Type 88 surface-to-ship missile system, which has an operational range of approximately 100 kilometers. Japan is expected to take part in maritime strike operations, counter-landing live-fire exercises, integrated air and missile defense, medical operations, and airfield runway repair.
それぞれ各国参加している国との間では、部隊間の連携、あと相互理解を一層深めることが、重視されているというふうに考えています。多国間訓練を通じまして各国の部隊の運用要領、あと情報共有の在り方とも、確認をしまして、共通の理解を積み重ねて、より円滑で効果的な、関係が構築できればいいというふうに思っております。
Well, the drill's commencement prompting a warning from Beijing. The foreign ministry said that the joint exercises in the name of security is, quote, akin to playing with fire that will ultimately backfire. Now, as the drills get underway, activists protested outside the armed forces of the Philippines headquarters in Quezon City. Well, they called on the government to halt the exercises and withdraw U.S. troops and missile systems from the country. The group, Bayan, slammed the Marcos administration for expanding the scope and scale of the drills, saying that authorities are allowing foreign troops to use Philippine land and sea as, quote, war playground. The group added that it was hypocritical for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to expand the Balikatan exercise. Well, they said that the drills consume significant energy resources. And this comes as Filipinos are being urged to conserve power amid an energy crisis linked to the war in the Middle East. Well, Malaysia is positioning itself as a steady hand amid rising global tensions. At a major defense exhibition in Kuala Lumpur, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim outlined the country's stance on security, technology and global partnerships. And he also emphasized Malaysia's non-aligned approach in an increasingly divided world. Well, CNA's Afifa Arifin with this report.
Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim struck a careful balance in his address at an international defense exhibition in Kuala Lumpur, acknowledging the impact of the ongoing Middle East conflict while positioning Malaysia as a stable and trusted partner in uncertain times. He noted that the conflict had already sent shockwaves through global markets, pushing up energy prices and reshaping supply chain decisions, but stressed that Malaysia has remained resilient. This particularly in sectors like aerospace and semiconductors, where Malaysian firms are already embedded in global supply chains, including those linked to defense and security systems. But a key focus of his speech was on how quickly defense technologies are evolving and the risks that come with it.
The technology on display here is advancing faster than the frameworks designed to govern it. Autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities, these are already in use. The question is how they are used, by whom, you see. How they are used, by whom, and under what constraints is one that governments must lead and one that industry cannot stand apart from.
Beyond the technology itself, Prime Minister Anwar also underscored Malaysia's policy of active non-alignment, saying the country maintains working relationships across major powers without being drawn into political rivalries. That's particularly significant as this conference brings together defense players from the US, China, Russia, the Middle East and beyond at a time when global tensions remain high. Afifa Arifin, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
North Korea says leader Kim Jong-un oversaw test launches of short-range missiles on Sunday, carrying new warheads that pack cluster and fragmentation munitions. State media KCNA reports the tests involved 5 upgraded Hwasong-11 surface-to-surface ballistic missiles that struck an island target zone more than 130 kilometers away. South Korea and Japan condemned the tests after detecting the launches yesterday. Seoul urging the North to stop what it calls provocations, and Tokyo lodging a strong protest with Pyongyang. The latest launch is North Korea's 7th this year and the 4th in April alone, and comes after last week's warning by the UN nuclear watchdog that Pyongyang is making swift advances to its ability to produce nuclear weapons. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Survivors of Hong Kong's deadliest fire in decades return home to salvage what's left of their belongings. Survivors of Hong Kong's deadliest fire in recent years started returning to the site of the disaster today to collect what's left inside their homes. Thousands of residents have signed up for the visits supervised by the government, and the whole process could take weeks. Geraldine Yap reports.
These residents are returning to their burned-out homes for the first time since a massive fire tore through Wang Fuk Court in Tai Po last year. The disaster destroyed 7 of the 8 blocks in the estate and killed 168 people. On Monday, some of those who survived put on protective gear and braced themselves to say goodbye to the flats they used to call home.
有啲複雜嘅，即係緊張嘅，又唔知道上樓嗰個樓梯嗰個情況係點樣。因為我哋嗰個情況即係睇新聞就話嗰個樓梯情況都幾嚴重，咁我唔知道啲老人家上唔上到去，咁就其中一個老人家跟我哋上去啦，我哋都好擔心佢行唔到上去。
Even a downpour in the afternoon did not stop residents from heading back. About 6,000 residents are being given 3-hour windows to enter their homes to collect what they could. Some were returning to largely unscathed flats, and for others, not much more than piles of ashes. More residents are expected to return to Wang Fuk Court over the next 2 weeks to salvage whatever they can from the burned-out blocks.
我老豆老母啲神主牌嗰啲相我係咪貴重啊？嗱，我話首先攞佢嗰啲嘢，其他我都唔考慮。你話相機、攝錄機嗰啲可以唔要都得啦，攞嚟做咩？
There are some 1,700 flats to pick through, and authorities hope the retrieval process will be completed by early May. Meanwhile, the wait continues for answers to what exactly started the fire and why it took 2 days to put out. The independent committee looking into the fire has heard testimonies from contractors, government officials, as well as residents. There have been accusations of negligence and systemic failures, and residents said they had repeatedly complained about the use of flammable materials and workers smoking, but nothing was done about it. The government has urged the public not to presume any findings before the committee releases its report, which is expected to be out in the second half of this year. Geraldine Yap, CNA, Hong Kong.
For more CNA's coverage of the Tai Po fire, do go to cna.asia or our mobile app, including this documentary that shows how survivors are rebuilding and reclaiming their lives in its aftermath. Pakistan is facing power outages stretching to long hours due to LNG crunch. But for some, the impact has been somewhat contained, largely due to a shift to solar power. Hira Mustafa files this report for CNA from Islamabad.
For the past 8 years, Haider Abbas has been running his family farm in the village of Jaya in Pakistan's Punjab province. Like many farmers across the country, he has grappled with soaring electricity costs and rising diesel prices. In 2022, however, he made a switch to solar power, a move that has helped shield him against recent energy price shocks.
इंटरनेशनल प्राइसेस थी उनके साथ कूद नहीं कर पा रहे थे, तो इसलिए फिर मैंने उस टाइम डिसाइड किया कि अगर मैंने इसमें कुछ प्रॉफिट कमाना है अपने एग्रीकल्चर में, तो मुझे सोलर की तरफ जाना पड़ेगा। और डे लाइट में ही हम अपने जो ट्यूबवेल्स हैं उनको ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं सोलर से। जो आप कह सकते हैं डे लाइट में जो हम वापडा से बिजली ले रहे हैं हम नहीं ले रहे, उसमें हमें वो बेनिफिट दे रहा है सोलर। और जो हम पहले डीजल्स ऑपरेट करते थे, डीजल इंजन्स, उसकी जगह सोलर ने जगह ले ली।
Heather is one of thousands of farmers who have shifted to solar energy to protect their livelihoods. That transition gained momentum 4 years ago after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine led to a spike in global energy prices.
Solarization is no longer limited to farms. In cities like Islamabad and Rawalpindi, many rooftops are covered with panels like these. What began as a cost-saving measure has evolved into a nationwide bottom-up energy transition, reducing reliance on imported fuel and easing pressure on the grid.
Solar installations have surged, driven by falling panel prices and rising electricity bills. Analysts say this rapid uptake has helped Pakistan avoid billions of dollars in fuel imports and soften the impact of volatility in global energy markets.
Pakistan's solar boom has provided cushion for Pakistan's electricity sector. That's why we are not facing that sort of a crisis in our power sector.
But challenges remain. Pakistan still turns to liquefied natural gas during evening peak hours when solar generation fades, and the bulk of its LNG imports come from the Gulf.
May, June, July, these are high consumption months in Pakistan because of the summer load, and because of the summer load we are quite vulnerable in terms of hours without sun. When there is no solar, people will start to use grid electricity, and Pakistan will have to use peaker power plants, and these peaker power plants are either RLNG plants, imported coal plants.
Some say storing surplus solar power and batteries with government support could be the next step in strengthening energy security.
The new factor in this, which is going to push us towards more solarization, is the massive decline in battery prices. So now it's become feasible to not only put solar panels on one's house or one's commercial property, it's now becoming very rapidly feasible to attach large batteries to it.
For farmers like Heather and millions of Pakistanis, the lesson from the crisis is clear. Energy security can no longer depend on the state alone. It could also lie in generating their own power. For CNA, I am Hira Mustafa in Islamabad.
Well, more condominium dwellers in Singapore are looking to install solar panels to cut electricity bills amid global energy pressures. Well, some solar panel installation companies have seen interest grow up to 4 times in April compared to earlier in January. But installation remains a challenge, from space constraints to cumbersome approval processes. Well, CNA's Nashira Rohim tells us more.
The impact of a conflict halfway around the world is being felt in our homes. For this company, it's seen 4 times as many homeowners installing solar panels in April compared to earlier in the year, as consumers look to cut their energy bills. Interest has also grown among condominium residents, but installing solar in these developments is more complicated.
There is certain restrictions for condominiums or MCSTs in that they aren't able to export any excess electricity back to the grid. That's just part of the rules that's in place. And because of that, then the ROI becomes a lot lower for these condominiums.
Even when the interest is there, the numbers are getting harder to stack up. For one, rising material costs driven in part by the conflict in the Middle East are making the economics of solar more difficult to justify.
Metal prices, silver prices have been affected. So the cost of materials, even when we supply directly from China, all the prices have increased. So there's an increase in prices for the last few months, and honestly, personally, I'm not sure whether the prices will go down.
Despite the higher upfront costs, industry players say solar can still deliver long-term savings. That's as they can be used to power shared facilities like lifts and lighting. One estate management representative says additional help may be needed to encourage more condos to make the transition towards cleaner energy.
The condo is very into using solar panels, then probably a grant or a rebate of your actual electricity bills, like your normal bills, like your SP services bills and all that, because that has been paying electricity cost has always been going up. For most condominiums, that would be a huge percentage of the cost.
Singapore is ramping up its solar ambitions. It's raising its target to 3 gigawatt peak by 2030. That can power up to 500,000 households per year. But right now, the Energy Market Authority warns that the Middle East conflict could keep fuel prices high. This could potentially mean sharper increases in electricity and gas tariffs. And that means solar power is becoming more important than ever.
China has warned that a strong El Nino this year may lead to a stronger global demand for fossil fuels and worsen price increases caused by the Middle East crisis. Now, the Met Agency said that moderate to strong El Nino conditions were forecast to emerge globally next month and will develop throughout the rest of the year. A strong El Nino can bring about either torrential rains and flooding or even droughts, both of which may force hydropower stations to reduce output or shut down entirely. And this will then, in turn, increase the need for other power sources, including oil and gas. The climate phenomenon occurs every 2 to 7 years and typically leads to short-term increases in global average temperatures. Well, the last very strong El Nino occurred in 2015, with a global average temperature record broken the following year. Well, Americans hoping for relief at the pump may have to keep waiting. With higher fuel costs hitting households, the issue is becoming a political vulnerability for the American president.
U.S. gasoline prices could remain above $3 a gallon until 2027. That's according to U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright. On Sunday, Wright told CNN he believed gas prices had peaked, but may not fall below the $3 level until next year. Gas prices have risen since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, and Iran retaliated against nearby countries. The rising energy costs added to political headwinds for President Donald Trump ahead of the November midterm elections. Trump's Republican Party will defend slim majorities in the Senate and House of Representatives.
This is an administration that decided on a war of choice in Iran and driving up these costs. I don't know if anybody thought about the consequences.
At a hearing last week, Democratic lawmakers excoriated Wright and the Trump administration for rising gas prices.
This president and cabinet made calculated choices to inflict this high-cost chaos on Americans.
So when are we really going to get $3 a gallon gas?
Well, I think that's going to be up to how the negotiations go.
Trump administration officials have offered differing views on how gas prices may shift. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent last week predicted gas prices would fall to the $3 per gallon range this summer.
So we will see, and I'm optimistic that during the summer we will see gas with a 3 in front of it sooner rather than later.
Trump himself has said that gas prices may remain elevated until November. The average price for a gallon of regular gas on Sunday was $4.05, according to an estimate by the AAA, compared to $3.16 a year ago.
And on that note, we wrap up Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And find us on Facebook and YouTube as well. Have a good night.